Hi, this is Clive Priddle. We have a new episode of The Current, and I'm delighted to be joined by Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo today, two Nobel Prize winning economists from MIT, whose book, Good Economics for Hard Times, was timely throughout the recent hard times that we've all been experiencing around the world. They're joining us today for the paperback edition of the book, which is updated with some thoughts about the nature of hard times now after the world has had a year and counting of COVID. Thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So I wanted to jump straight in. We'll deal with the good economics in a little bit, but let's start off with the hard times. So where are hard times hardest right now? You are global economists in the sense that your focus is worldwide. Your research has come from the developing world extensively. When you look at hard times right now, where do you see them most acutely evident?
Well, I think we don't really have all the data we need to say that. I suspect there are parts of Africa where we just don't even know how hard the times are. In terms of measured data, I think Indonesia is the place where things look pretty dire. There's pockets of Africa and Asia, other pockets of Asia, where also things look pretty bad. But I think mostly one of the shame of the current moment is part of the shame of the current moment is for places in Africa, we really have no idea what the real numbers are. The tests are not there. There's infrastructure for testing isn't really there. So we're really whatever we'll be saying, we'll be making it up mostly.
The West has been so busy fighting its coronavirus over the last year that it's perhaps forgotten its responsibility to help the rest of the world. And I think just today we read that in America, I think we've thrown away 1 million doses of coronavirus because we weren't able to get them into people's arms in a timely fashion. What is the damage that's being done to the developing world's economies because of the coronavirus?
That again is something we don't know yet. We don't know the extent of the crisis that is happening now, and we don't know how long it will linger. And of course, because we don't know how long the health crisis will linger as yet. All we know, and I think that we can say with certain amount of certainty, is that it's much worse than it should have been, and it's much worse than it could have been. Because of a complete moral failure of the rich world from the very beginning of the pandemic, as we highlighted in the forward of the paperback edition, and continuing to today. I really wish I could have told you in this conversation that since those words, there was a dramatic turnaround and things have changed, but it hasn't been the case. Neither on the health front, Abhijit spoke about testing, and of course vaccination is the elephant in the room, nor on the economic front, where some things could have been done as well.
Tell us about the moral failing of the West. How would you describe that?
I mean, it's in a sense, it's hard to even find strong enough words for it. I mean, this is. I mean, what's remarkable is the fact that people are dying, the vaccines are being thrown away. There is words, but really no plan for putting together the kind of vaccination the world needs. And in fact, it's even not clear that this isn't in the self-interest of the West. I think, if anything, if this pandemic is allowed to fester, the waves that we see in the US now and in the UK, will keep coming back because the vaccine seems to be very good at reinventing itself. And so it's sort of a mind-boggling failure. It's just a failure. It's pusillanimity at a scale which I would have been, I would have not expected, actually. I'm rather, I can be quite pessimistic, but this was way past my pessimistic benchmark.
Also sheds an interesting light on the past, and for me that has really been eye-opening in a way that I wish my eyes had not been open. I'm more of an optimistic person and trying to see glass half full of the time. But one thing we have kept telling in our work, starting with poor economics and again in good economics for hard time, is that one reason that the West has not helped the developing world very effectively is that it's difficult because there are many problems going all over the place. Often we don't exactly know what to do. And in any case, every country to some extent finds their own path. So that's kind of an excuse or a reason for why the international solidarity has not been what it otherwise might have been, moving backward up to COVID. And then COVID comes, and it is so obvious what needs to be done. And it is so easy comparatively. You know, we've said, I think you can't airlift people out of poverty like you can out of an earthquake, but this is as close as airlifting as there will be. You know, producing vaccines, shipping them, etc. There are issues, but they are like pretty manageable logistical issues that we could have handled, and yet nobody was there in the West to get it done. And so then moving back, you say maybe the reasons why we didn't help before is not because it was a hard problem, it's because we somehow are not up to it. And I don't think we are the only one to revisit the past in this light. So that's gonna cast some interesting light on future discussions between countries in the world.
Am I hearing you say that you're beginning to wonder, based on how the West has handled COVID in respect to the rest of the world, if the West ever really wanted to assist the developing world to the extent that you hoped it did? Are you starting to think that maybe the West is doing this in order that the developing world should not develop?
No, I think it's more pusillanimity than actual malice. I think it's simply the fact that, you know, for Biden or for Boris Johnson or for Macron or for Merkel, it's just not that important. That's sadly and I think they're wrong in thinking it's not important. I think this is going to both defeat their own battle against COVID. But I think right now, the idea they are giving away our vaccines to those other people seems to be somehow the subtext of everything, and they're just scared of that, you know, coming from the always charming Republicans who are always able to find any racist narrative that they can hang on to, and everyone else. I just think that there is a sense in which everybody is afraid of attacks from various forms of extremely narrow-minded nationalists, and that's what defeats this. So I don't think I don't think it's malice. I think there's lots of people with good intentions, but I think the political weight of the right has been so. It's the last few years have just so underscored it that I think that maybe relative to when we wrote Poor Economics 10 years ago or a bit more, I think the world is in a less comfortable place. I think just everybody's scared of that right-wing narrative of, the liberals are taking your resources and giving away to these useless people.
We might come back to the American right in a minute, but I wanted to ask you also whether part of the difficulty at the moment for the US and for Europe perhaps is some of the other people who are in power, some of the other governments who are in power in parts of the world that may need support. I mean, the Chinese government is not a naturally benign partner when it comes to helping people get virus. Your home country, Abhijit, of India, has a very strong-willed prime minister at the moment whose coverage of the COVID crisis has been, quite widely criticized. Are we at a moment where we lack strong, helpful, good-natured leaders around the world as well, or is this all down to the West?
I think that for all the things that have been said about both Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi Jinping, I think neither of them is against people getting vaccinated. I think Mr. Modi might have miscalculated, the political ramifications of what he thought was, a broad gesture of solidarity. Plus, maybe he was surely over optimistic, and I think he likes being doing these kinds of gestures. But I don't think that it was. I don't think while you could criticize many things that both of them do, and it has been criticized, I don't think that it's reasonable to say that if more vaccines were easily available, Modi won't take them. I think his incentives are very clear. So is China has been one of the more active donors to Africa. You may not love the Chinese vaccines, whether they are exactly vetted in the appropriate way, but who's giving vaccines to many countries is China. I think that it seems. I think that if it's the US that didn't let India expand its production. Biden put a block on the export of the reagents needed for producing vaccines. I think one could have views on the Indian government, the Chinese government, but I do think that in this particular issue, I absolutely don't think that that's the problem. I think the problem is mostly on the Western side.
In this instance, India and South Africa and Indonesia and Korea would have been wanted to be partners both in production and distribution of vaccines, and China was not really needed. In fact, that's another way in which this is a bizarre situation, because it was such an easy win, soft power wise, for the West, like the European Union plus the US plus the UK, to cooperate with these middle-income countries and spread the word with vaccines. It would have been such a soft power win against China that it's surprising they didn't want to do it in the current circumstances, where there are other reasons why one might want to rein in China. So that's another really baffling aspect of this situation, because it's another form of self-interest that seemed to have not been enough to prevail.
So when you wrote Good Economics for Hard Times, it was pre-COVID, and your focus was obviously just broadly about what made sense to help economies around the world face difficulties. And one of the things that you focused on directly was the problem of a decline in the trust of government. And that this is not limited to the West, but it's particularly potent in the West. And as you just alluded to, perhaps that's what's contributing to the pusillanimity of the government, that it doesn't feel empowered to act, that it doesn't feel it can carry the electorate with it. I wondered if we might go back to the good economics part of the title of the book then, and talk a little bit about government and trust. Is it possible for the US to have a government that a visible majority of the people trust?
It's a frightening question. I think the answer is yes. I do think that if you look at the trust in government, it wasn't that long ago that a majority of governments of people in the US said they trusted government. It was, this number has gone down from over 50% to just over 40% in the course of the last 10 years or so, if I get the numbers right. So I do think that we're not that far away. I think it's clear that there's been a I think, very creative use of fake news and all kinds of. I think the right has been quite deliberately undermining government, and that's true in most countries. This idea that it's a kind of an elite conspiracy, that the government is kind of a mask for an elite conspiracy, is being floated more and more successfully. On the other hand, the fact that the US, even through Mr. Obama's relatively liberal era, let the earnings of the bottom, 70% of the population essentially stay flat for year after year, doesn't help. I mean, I do think that in the end, people have reason to be cynical. They may be wrong, but the fact that very little got done to their earnings, which may or may not be all they should care about. Maybe Obamacare was worth more to them than they think. I think it probably was. But nonetheless, I think that there is a reasonable case to be made that, in the end, what was going on? Why weren't you doing anything for us? So I think that there is a strong trend down, even in the recent era, which suggests that it's not that it's just historical, legacy. I mean, and part of that is clearly the more and more effective use of just blatant lies by the right. I think that's completely one part of that story. But I think there is also a very clear and fertile ground for those stories, because if you look at the overall performance of the US has grown enormously since 1980, but most, the earnings of the lower income population have stayed flat. And that just somehow, through the Clinton years, the Obama years, I'm not saying nothing was done. Maybe Obamacare was still more useful than people acknowledge it to be. But I think overall, the fact that there wasn't a concerted action to redistribute towards the lower income population over 45 years of falling incomes, or flat incomes and occasionally falling incomes, it just seems to me to be setting up for that narrative that the elites talk about how they are pro-poor, but look, what have they done for you? And you can see that in the low income population in the US is where the answer is often to the question, can the government do anything to help you? The answer is often no. And cutting taxes on businesses is what the low income population is in favor of. That has to be a sign of something deeper than just lies by the Republicans. I think it's really a perception that what has the government done for us?
Inequality is bad economics, and redistribution is complicated politics. How does anybody deal with this?
Well, in some sense, that's where that's one place where the COVID crisis might help, in the sense that not only in the US, but in a lot of countries in the West, we've seen a massive expansion of social safety nets. So the rich countries spent about 20% of their portfolio in fiscal stimulus measures, not all of it in redistribution, but a fair amount of it. And it was done in a way that I think was very well received by people, relatively smooth. Even in the US, people complained at the beginning, etc., but relatively smooth. And it reached a much wider set of people than the typical social safety net in normal time reaches. And that might have that might create a positive example of what redistribution or social insurance looks like. It's not about charity, it's about supporting each other when we need it. That might carry us for a while, might help the effort of the current administration in the US to really expand some social programs. For example, the child credit is a very good example of that. And if we succeed doing that, and it changes the image of welfare as a part of kind of a big fraud that started to be, image of which started to be conveyed during the Reagan era with the welfare queen and so on. If we manage to kind of change that perspective, which I think we stand a good chance, because, for example, the Biden proposals of expansion of child credit and other forms of social safety nets are extraordinarily popular. So are at the state level the measures for increasing the minimum wage, which, for example, had a 60% supermajority in Florida, of all places. We might form a coalition around these teams. There will still be opposition, but at least the opposition will be among more traditional rich against poor lines, which are much healthier debate to have in some sense. And there is a chance, I think, that works out, and that therefore we managed to, in the US, that is, managed to expand the role of the government in people's lives in a positive way, and that in turn increase the trust in governments. And you can see why some part of the right is extraordinarily against this idea. So they are against some of these programs, despite the program being super popular, precisely because they're afraid that the legitimacy of the government would stand improved as a result of it. The fact they're scared of it suggests to me it's a good thing, and that we are, potentially on the right track for maybe a loosening of this economics political grip that you were referring to.
Most people on the right will tell you that they're in favor of good government, that what they're really worried about is bad government that runs up unsustainable debts. So can we afford to pay for all this?
The interest rates are a reasonable measure of what the demand for government debt is right now. I think in the last many years, we've sort of seen that basically, I think one consequence of increasing inequality is this sloshing around of funds which don't have a place to be. So I think that in the long run, there, I suspect, despite the fact that the interests are low, there are probably good reasons to increase taxes. And I hope, in fact, that this stimulus package eventually lands with an increase in taxes. I do think that that's the right way to go. So I think that, but it's not that it's, at these interest rates, it's relatively easy to borrow without, and especially if you have 7% real growth, then it's pretty easy to increase debt without disastrously affecting the debt to GDP ratio. So I mean, I do think that probably there will need to be changes in the funding, but US, for example, is extraordinarily undertaxed relative to most OECD countries. So it's the third lowest ratio of taxes to GDP in the OECD. Much lower than most European countries. So I do think that there is space for a short-run stimulus and space for a more long-run, more sustainable, more tax-funded. I think taxes. Speaking of inequality, I think taxes would actually be a good thing per se. Taxes on the rich would be a good thing per se, in my view. But that's even without the fiscal compulsion.
So the government is spending lots of money. There's the prospect, perhaps, that we have a situation whereby a majority of lawmakers might even approve of a raise in taxes to pay for this because they're against the debt. Does that mean that the Reaganomics era is dead? Have we really moved on from all that now?
I think it's Krugman who speaks about zombie economics. So it's dead, but zombies come back from the dead from time to time. And I think that's a very good image. I think in the profession, maybe 98% of economists would have buried a lot of the, unadulterated Reaganomics.
I think that's an optimistic number. I think
What's your
98% of the economists we know, which is a selected group. I suspect that if you take the economists at Bank of America and
I was talking about the profession, the academic profession.
Even among academic profession, there's lots of business school professors who call themselves economists. I do
What's
think
your
that
percentage?
I'll say 60, but I think it's still an impressive number. I think we moved from where the consensus was, when I was a grad student, the world lived in this place where everything was fiscal discipline. I'm not convinced it's 98%. I think that even if you look at, especially it's generational partly, I feel that there is still a lot of people who were very convinced that fiscal discipline is the source of all well-being. I think that we spend more time with people who are more skeptical of that, but I don't think that that's necessarily that doesn't get it to 98%. I think probably, but it's a majority, and I think that's already a sea change from when I was a grad student.
But then, on top of that, the issue is that the profession, the academic profession, is only related to the policymaker and to the politician and to people who write columns in the Wall Street journals, with a substantial gap. And even if it were 98%, and maybe it's in fact just 60% of the profession that has now understood that the canon of the Reaganomics is full of holes that makes it mostly irrelevant as an empirical matter, that the policymaker haven't gotten the memo often, or some of them. And that's why you see this coming back as zombie economics. We talk of the book of many people who think they are original, being slaves to some dead economist. And there are a lot of people who are in the policy world, in the op-ed world, in the Senate, who are slaves of the dead economists. So that's why the zombie keeps coming back, and that will take a longer time to kind of work its way out of the system.
Especially because there are institutional, I think bondholders and a large part of the very rich really hate taxes. And so I do think there is always going to be great funding for anybody who says that, look, something awful is happening as a result of these policies. So, inflation is ticking up to 3% or whatever other disaster they will come up with. So I think there's a real subsidy for being panicked about any kind of free spending government policy.
So I do think that the Trump tax cut helped in some respects because the whole idea that deficit was a problem, etc., that had to go away in order to justify the Trump tax cut. So the sort of squeaky clean fiscal conservative sort of lost their place in the sun, and they haven't really been replaced in an effective way.
No, I think Trump's tax cut, as we say in the book, came with this other right-wing myth, which is that there would be increased growth. As soon as you cut taxes, growth will speed up. We've never seen any evidence for that, but it's always there as one of the other promises that, in the long, maybe it's okay now, but in the long run, you lose out because growth goes down as soon as you raise taxes. So I think that was also, that's another narrative that's always there to be trotted out.
But we used to have both. The deficits are horrible and tax cuts are great. And I think deficits are horrible are gone with the Trump tax cuts. So that's already one that's already one sort of roundabout way to arrive at a more saner view of the economic conversation.
I was going to ask you both if we might look forward just a little bit. And since one of you is slightly more optimistic and one of you is slightly more pessimistic, you can look forward in two different directions. So perhaps I can ask you this. In terms of good economics for our current situation, could you perhaps say what you think are the most important positive things that could be done, let's say, in the next phase of government, from the second half of the Biden presidency? What are the best two things that America could do or the world could do? And what would be the most harmful? What would be the biggest mistakes?
I'll start with the optimistic side. I really think that I think this whole story of minimum global minimum taxes and then hopefully raise those taxes. I don't see a reason why 15% is a reasonable number. I think we could go to 25 without any disaster. I think a global minimum tax that's much higher, and I think that there is I think the fact that this is being done, if it gets done, then it will create, I think, a strong pressure to do more. Because I think there would be a infrastructure for checking all these things. So I think there would be once it is shown to work, and I feel like the countries that live off basically helping other countries lose on taxes should be. I have no sympathy for them, to be honest. I know that I will lose some readers in those countries, but I really absolutely don't sympathize. I think that's a extraordinarily selfish behavior, which we have countenanced for years and years. So I would say that would be one very clear. The other, I'm still maybe just. I'm after saying I'm not really pessimist. I'm also an optimist, just maybe less than Esther. I'm still hoping that COP26 will be a success. That there is some, just this pandemic lit a fire under us. It should have. I mean, if it hasn't, it would be amazing, and people should feel. And I do think that in Europe, very strongly, the younger half of the population is increasingly extremely environmentally aggressively supporting environmental causes, and I think that there must. I mean, in Europe, it would be very hard for the governments to not respond to that, and the US is a little harder. But even there, I do think that these recent set of disasters plus the COVID might make people realize that we're really not. I think we're riding a tiger, and I think the sooner we recognize that what we're riding is a tiger, the safer it is.
The worst thing is, in my opinion, is just the flip side of the best thing, which is would be to let up on the effort for delivering as a government internally in the US, through both on the health front with the vaccination and on the economic front with the COVID relief support, followed by the expansion of the child credits and working on the minimum wage, even if it's not can't be done at the federal level, can be done at the state level. Losing ground on these two very basic things would be terrible. Succeeding would be great, because that would be showing that government can deliver. And similarly for the international situation for redistribution in the world, the worst thing we could do is what we are doing today, which is nothing. We have to become serious about vaccinating the world. We have to become serious about putting in place emergency economic relief to help the very poor economies that need to impose COVID restriction to support their citizens. And these are two things that we can do. we know how to do, the evidence is there, we have a lot of experience, in fact, successful experience on vaccination. Gavi is a great example to follow. Even PEPFAR in a slightly different area in HIV/AIDS, but was a great achievement of the Bush administration. And a reprise of that is possible. Not doing it, I think, would be a disaster. And we are, as we said at the top of the program, we are long overdue for that. And if we don't fix it soon, then, for example, a chance of doing good thing at COP26 could really be undermined.
Well, listen, good lessons require good teachers, and I want to thank you both for joining us today and for your book, which is a wonderful thing, and I'm very glad that you were able to join the Current. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hachette.